I'm really excited about this. Liz is somebody that I've admired for a long time. I had the privilege of finally meeting her at a book launch, at Helen Ross's book launch a few weeks ago, and she didn't disappoint. She's a great communicator. She talks about really important points. And today she's talking about minds wide open, empowering every way of thinking, something which I think is going to be of interest to all of us. So without further ado, Liz, I'd be very interested in listening to your talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. And thank you so much, Tony, for everything you've already said. So I originally had a talk planned for the Neurodiversity Show, or two different ones, one for parents and one for educators. But when this came out as a general sort of empowering focus, I thought I would try and do what I do probably too often and make it very general. So I wanted to look at neurodiversity and mental health across all dimensions, really. I am Liz Day. There's a little bit about me on the screen. Bottom right, there's a QR code that goes to my website, and that'll be on again at the end. I will try and keep things short and sweet because I know I've only got 20 minutes. So apologies if I am talking quite fast. Hopefully you can play it back in slow after. So yeah, I've gone on twice. This is me in different roles really here. Me with my son, and this was a good few years ago because he's now 6 foot and considerably taller than me. This was me carrying him on my back. Also a photo with the green exclamation mark from quite a few years ago when I headed up the communications for the British Dyslexia Association. And then the more recent photo of me graduating with my Masters of Psychology, which was very useful and interesting. It wasn't as fun as I naively thought it was going to be, but it was a great achievement. So first of all, to get everyone sort of ready for what we're talking about and just thinking for yourself, feel free to put in the comments, or just actually with this one, probably better just to think mentally. What I also want you to think is how you would answer this, also how the wider community and population who are not so clued up on neurodiversity would answer. So mental health so it only means poor mental health. Neurodivergent individuals are more likely to mask their distress. So keep thinking about whether you think it's a myth or a fact and what other people would think. Talking about mental health makes things worse, and being neurodivergent can be a risk factor for poor mental health. Now, I'm making an assumption that most people here will not find these answers surprising, but do not underestimate how much this could be new information to people who aren't as clued up. So mental health doesn't mean poor mental health. Yes, it includes poor mental health, but it's about good mental health as well, and that is really important. Yes, neurodivergent individuals are more likely to mask their distress or show their distress in different ways that could then be linked to behaviour. Talking about mental health makes things worse. Now, in some ways, I would argue that talking things through and certainly counselling and things can feel like it's making things worse for a little while. But in the long term, it really doesn't. And it's so important that we do talk. And yes, sadly, being neurodivergent is a known risk factor for poor mental health. But I'm going to be talking about protective factors. So it's not all bad news. So why does mental health in neurodivergent people in particular matter? Well, we know that generally mental health concerns are rising. There's an NHS digital report that came out in 2022 focusing on young people's mental health. There is lots of anecdotal and research-based evidence that mental health difficulties are particularly high amongst neurodivergent individuals. As I mentioned earlier, expressions of distress are often different, so therefore misunderstood. Early understanding and support are absolutely crucial to developing protective factors, so people can then realise their potential and use their strengths rather than being held back by their challenges. Okay, this is something that if you feel you want to, please feel free to put either of your answers to these in the chat. But equally, if you want to just listen and take it in, or even jot it down on your own piece of paper for your own benefit, please do. So what does mental health mean to you? Do you have in your head what the term mental health means? That, I think, is an easier one. What I discovered through my research last year was that mental health literacy isn't as well understood and doesn't necessarily mean anything to a lot of people at the moment. Hopefully, in another 15 minutes' time, it will mean something to everyone. So please feel free to share those comments, and I'm going to carry on. So, okay, I won't leave you hanging. What is mental health literacy? The term was coined by Joel Mittal in 1997, focusing on knowledge and beliefs aiding recognition, management, and prevention. Before that, mental health had very much been linked with mental health disorders, and that's what the focus was. So this saw a turn in the way we were looking at mental health and a bit more of a sort of positive psychology angle to it. And then in 2018, Diaz et al. Identified 4 key areas of mental health literacy. So knowledge of mental health problems, challenging stereotypes, help-seeking behaviours, and self-help strategies. Now, I've purposely got a little timer icon on the screen for the next few slides to remind me not to bang on about this, because it's not really the purpose of this talk. But I do just want to mention that I did carry out research about mental health literacy in 16 to 20-year-olds using a mixed methods research approach. And I identified where there are gaps and highlighted need for education and community-based improvements. What I would say is, as I whiz through the next few slides, if anyone is interested in finding out more about what I did or the sort of outcomes, please get in touch with me afterwards. I'm going to flash up a few things and not give you that much time to look at it because there's so much to fit in. So I used the mental health literacy questionnaire for young adults that was adapted by Diaz et al. This is an example of some of the statements that the young people had to answer on a scale of strongly disagree to strongly agree. I also carried out interviews with education and mental health professionals based on the outcome of the questionnaire results. From that, I created a mind map highlighting the key areas that came out of both the questionnaire results and the conversations. And then finally, this is a summary of my findings. As I say, I know I'm not giving you time to read it, but please speak to me anytime. I'm always happy to talk about it.
Sponsored by IVI. Imagine turning your meeting's audio into a live mind map instantly so you remember what matters. Well, try IVI for free now at ivi.app. That's IVVI.app.
Which leads me on to why I'm mentioning this. For one thing, yes, I spent a lot of time on it, and it was the part of my master's actually that I enjoyed the most because it meant so much. So I wanted to mention it, but also it's so important thinking about how this knowledge and research helps us to support neurodivergent individuals in various settings and communities. And I want to make it clear when I'm talking about supporting neurodivergent individuals, I'm not just talking about supporting others, I'm talking about supporting ourselves, as I'm sure a lot of us here today are neurodivergent ourselves. So empowered understanding is so possible. And I was with a fantastic group of people yesterday, and we discussed a bit about how we don't know what we don't know, and other people don't know what they don't know. So for those of us who do have an understanding, it's important we share that. It's important for people to know their own strengths and challenges. Challenge stigma against neurodiversity and mental health. Seek support early. Asking for help is powerful, not a failure. And identify tools that work for each individual. So for me, exercise is a huge thing. And actually music does very little for me. But I know for other people, it can be the complete opposite. So it's what works for you. Accessing help and support within your communities. Normalize help seeking and make it feel safe. This can also include role-playing, how to ask for support in different scenarios. And role-playing isn't just a good tool for young people. I've seen it work really well with adults. I've done this in parent workshops, supporting parents as to sort of how to navigate the education system and work with their child's school. Identify trusted peers, so that may be mental health first aiders within the workplace or within some schools, and resources that are available. Also, highlight external support systems that either you can explore together with the person you're supporting, or they can look in independently. So things like CAMS, local services, disabled students allowance. Building resilience. This is so important. And it's something I've had to do a lot of. I don't think I did have a lot of resilience 20 years ago. And over the last 20 years, it's built considerably. I'm still a bit of a softie, I have to say, but it's really important. And I am a strong believer in creating psychologically safe environments. And I would urge anyone to have a look at Amy Edmondson's work on this to really, truly understand what that means. And it's relevant for every environment as far as I'm concerned. We also need to scaffold emotional skills for other people so that we're supporting them with how to regulate, and then gradually ease off so that they become the person in control as their confidence grows. Practical tools like routines, co-regulation, strengths-based feedback are all fantastic. And then also promote flexibility, self-advocacy, and positive identity. It's really important that we pass that control over to individuals. If we do it all for them, how are they ever going to cope in the world? Because they're never going to have someone always at their side. Relevant for children and adults. Supported communication strategies, and Tony spoke a bit about validating emotions. It's so important to validate emotions, not to tell people you shouldn't feel like that. They do feel like that, and that's okay. What does that mean to feel like that? Why are they feeling like that? Have an open discussion about these kind of things. Offer multiple ways to communicate. So that might be writing, drawing, typing. And something that I think is really important to remember is, for one thing, yes, drawing isn't just for children, but equally, and this almost brings a bit of trauma out in me, remember that not all children like drawing. I will speak another time about my traumatic experience at school having to draw when I really couldn't. Also, be present and available without pressure. So be there, but don't feel you have to be fixing things. Encourage expression without focusing on fixing. Talk things through. Let other people come to their own conclusions, and just guide rather than providing solid answers. The power of ongoing communication. I talk a lot about open and honest communication. I know I am sometimes too honest in my communication, and apologies if that ever upsets anyone, but I'd rather let it be known sort of where things are at. And I will say if I'm having a bad day. When someone says, "How are you today?" I very rarely just say fine. I give a comprehensive answer. Apologies if that sometimes goes on too long. But small, everyday conversations build trust over time. When children know it's safe to talk about the little things in their life. So maybe, I don't know, my son used to do marble runs, and he would record which marble run won the race. We used to have a lot of conversation about that. And I honestly believe that's helped now for him to talk to me about all the bigger things in his life. And hopefully ongoing that will be the same. So children and adults need to be able to talk through challenges, because talking through things help to process emotions and avoid escalation. I see it as a ball of tangled wool in my own brain. If I don't talk things through with other people, however much I'm talking to myself about it, that ball gets more and more knotty. Whereas if I talk through things that have happened in my day or little concerns I've had, often it all becomes untangled and I can deal with them so much better rather than becoming a big issue. Also, communication builds emotional vocabulary and supports long-term mental well-being. Remember, all of this is about giving us strategies that act as protective factors against poor mental health. Quick personal example, I've already mentioned my son, my delightfully dyslexic son, as I refer to him. And he has always found this really empowering. And actually, my daughter once said, "Well, hang on, what am I? I'm not dyslexic, so I'm not delightful." And I think we managed to come up with something else at the time, thinking she was neurotypical. But I think it's quite likely, like me, she has ADHD. So my 18-year-old son, he's only just turned 18 in March. And he suddenly felt really overwhelmed by adulting. And it coincided with him finally having a formal dyslexia diagnosis. We hadn't gone down this route before, something I can talk about separately to people. We needed to do it now, ready for him going to university and accessing disabled students allowance. We had always suspected he was dyslexic from the age of about 5 or 6. I was pretty confident. But when we actually had that diagnosis, the official label inevitably brought up emotions. I'm sure his dad won't mind me mentioning that he is also dyslexic, although undiagnosed. And reading some of the things in the report that was beautifully written by Joe Rees made him really aware of some of the things he struggled with. And it was almost like he didn't know that he was struggling with those things because of dyslexia. He felt it was a deficit of his, whereas in looking at our son, we were able to see all his strengths. And I'm hoping that his dad was also then able to see, okay, because I find that difficult, I do things differently, and that's a benefit. So through open communication and supportive scaffolding, we actually talked through a conversation. He wanted to hand his notice in with one part-time job he was doing, but didn't want to let anyone down. He'd only originally taken it on to help his sister, really. And it was the pressure of that was really getting to him. And a lot of other things seemed to be an issue, but once he'd sorted that out, they weren't. We talked about what he could say to his boss. And actually, the feedback that came back via my daughter was that it was the most lovely, pleasant resignation conversation that they'd ever received. And after he'd done that and we'd talked through those things, he returned to his calm self and continued to support his friends and embrace his independence. And I have to say that supporting others and having empathy are two of my son's massive strengths that I believe really are significantly due to him being neurodivergent and facing challenges himself and understanding that not everything's easy in life. So coming to the end, I've got a couple minutes left. What can we do to support others? We can lead with empathy, connection before correction, validate experiences, especially around diagnosis or life transitions. There are lots of things we face in life that bring up different emotions for different people, and that's okay. Scaffold independence at a pace that suits every individual. We are all individuals. And model mental health awareness and self-care practices. Don't be a martyr, because actually then you're making it out to other people that they shouldn't be looking after their own mental health, and we all should. So remember, neuroaffirmative support is about understanding, not fixing. Mental health literacy empowers people to thrive and fulfill their potential using their differences rather than fighting against them. Together, we can build environments of safety, support, and connection. And please remember, your mental health matters too. I always think of that analogy of if you're in a plane and you need to use oxygen masks, which hopefully none of us will ever need to do, you need to put your own on before you help someone else with theirs. It's the same with mental health. So I wanted to include a quick slide about supporting our own mental health. And I'd like you to reflect on something you already do that supports your mental health. Maybe you don't even realize you do it to support your mental health, but it is a byproduct, and something else you'd like to try. And it's important that we set up strength-based routines and not shoulds that we then guilt ourselves into doing because otherwise we'll feel cross with ourselves for not doing. Make support part of your environment. It shouldn't be an emergency backup plan. So some of the things that have already been mentioned, actually, different breathing techniques. I've used these recently with a group of adults I was supporting, and different techniques worked well for different people. And as Tony said, some don't work well for anyone and they try something else. The mental stop and name game. So 5 things you can see, 4 you can touch, etc. Now, I have to say, I used to think I couldn't do this because I couldn't remember which one was the 5, which one was the 4, which one was the 3. And then I realized it really doesn't matter. That the point is you stop, You go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you use your different senses. And things like that are so obvious when you realize. But remember, when you're helping other people, they may also be a little bit, I can't get this wrong, I must get it right, have that perfectionist side of them where they think, well, if I can't do it properly, I can't do it at all. That's not the point. And also, I'm going to do a shameless plug for free resources on my website, Collectively Diverse. I have done a couple of guided meditations and body scans. Feel free to try them. And even people who say meditations don't work for them, I challenge you to try them and see if when it's guided, it's a little bit more helpful. Remember, your well-being matters too. We are on to the penultimate slide. So, empowered minds. We shouldn't have to change who we are to fit the world. Let's change the world to embrace who we all are. And we are all collectively diverse, hence the name of the community interest company that I've set up. Empowerment isn't about being normal, it's about being authentically you. Thank you ever so much for listening today. Please do get in touch and let's carry on these great conversations. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you, Liz. That was absolutely fantastic. I knew I was going to enjoy that. What's also beautiful is that the things you've been talking about are going to segue beautifully into Danielle's talk later on. So that's really made my day. Just a couple of questions that I think would be really interesting to find your take on. You talked at the beginning, you said mental health doesn't always mean mental health problems. That's a fantastic thing to say. It really puts things into perspective. But do we talk as though there's such a difference as somebody with mental health problems and somebody without mental health problems? And it's a kind of a black and white sort of line between the two of them. How does that work exactly in your experience?
Yeah, there's not. And we do talk like that. And I think it's really important. And when I've run modules to do with wellbeing for young people in particular, I constantly refer back to the fact that mental health is like physical health. We all have mental health. We all have physical health. And however well or fit someone is, they're never entirely physically fit. There might be a little twinge there, or they occasionally suffer from migraines. And it's the same with our mental health. Yes, we may not be clinically depressed, but we may still be suffering from some poor mental health in certain areas. So absolutely, please don't think there's a black and white line between good mental health, bad mental health. I suffer with mental health. I'm absolutely fine. If anyone tells you their mental health is perfect, or in fact anything is perfect, they're lying. So yeah, absolutely great thing to raise. Thanks, Martin.
There's a really interesting thing. I sometimes talk about what it means to be disabled, for instance. And it seems that there's a binary operating that doesn't exist. I mean, I don't know what perfect abled would be. I mean, other than God. And I don't know what the opposite binary would be other than dead. So I don't understand that there's a binary there. But this also brings to mind the idea that the old story about how it's a rather gruesome story, and forgive me if people don't find this particularly nice. The old business story about how to boil a frog. And there are two ways. You can either put the frog in boiling water and the frog goes, "Ooh, that's hot," and jumps out. Or you put the frog in cold water and gradually heat it up. And the frog doesn't realize. The same, it seems to me, is quite clear with mental health problems. If you like, is there a way that we, as concerned observers, can notice when the frog is getting too hot for other people, as it were?
100%, yeah. And by having that mental health literacy, really understanding the bigger picture, it can help us to do that. And it's something that my older sister was amazing with me years ago, even when we didn't live in the same town, but we'd speak on the phone and she'd say, "Liz, have you stopped taking your antidepressants?" And I'd say, "Yeah, I thought I'd try it for a while." She's like, "How's that going?" Like, "Oh, yeah, I'm not me, am I? Things aren't right." And she was incredible. She's a nurse, so I guess that was partly her background and how she knew about, sort of could pick up on those signs. Plus, she'd known me all my life. And then over the years, that's transferred to me. And now I can do that myself. And then we find ourselves also able to do that for other people. So really important that we politely, in the right way for each individual, point out to people if maybe they do need to take care of themselves more. A lot of us try to be martyrs and do everything for everyone else and forget about ourselves, and that we can't help other people as well. And that's the only way I've really been able to get the message into my own head is by telling myself I can't help other people if I'm not in a good place. So I have to prioritize my own mental health.
We turn it into a responsibility for ourselves. That's beautiful. There's somebody, I believe, who probably doesn't like their smartphone. Well, that's a brilliant question. Is there a big overlap between misdiagnosis for ADHD and, for instance, bipolar disorder, or what kind of levels of misdiagnosis might there be?
Yeah, I am not an expert on this, but it is something we covered in the Masters in Psychology, and I've looked into a little bit myself. I think there is a big misdiagnosis generally, or there has been in the past. ADHD has been missed and labelled as other things. I think the key thing to know, as I've kind of raised in my talk, is that neurodivergence brings with it an increased chance of mental health. So quite likely there's going to be some kind of mental health difficulty going on, maybe more significant than in your neurotypical person, if there is such a thing. And yes, sometimes that means people have been misdiagnosed as bipolar. So yeah, we need to be really careful of that. And I think a lot of labeling we need to be careful of. And for me, the key thing always is to identify strengths and challenges so that we can use our strengths to address our challenges.
Thank you, Liz.
I think we're coming up to our time, but there's one final comment I'd make about that is sometimes it's not just a misdiagnosis, it's a co-occurrence, and it's a misattribution of a particular presentation. So you could present a certain way, be bipolar and have ADHD, but you're misattributing a trait to something like ADHD that can be dealt with in a different way.
And that opens up a whole other huge discussion about how we need to be looking across the board.
Yes, and I think, yeah, it's a great discussion to have. Maybe we could bring that up into the panel later on in the day. You know, this kind of, because, you know, Arran started the Dyslexia Show 2 years ago, and I remember him 7 years ago saying, oh, I'd really wish we had a national dyslexia show, when we were doing the Yorkshire Festival with, and then, you know, 2 years after that, I remember him saying, I'm going to do it. And then next year, and then COVID happened, and then he gave it a miss for a year, and then he did the first one, and then the second one was really big and successful, and then last year was fantastic. Unfortunately, he made a loss on both of them, and everyone else made the gains, as it were. You know, everyone got so much joy out of all of that and benefits on every level, and he was carrying the weight of all of that. And then this year he moved it, and last year it was Dyslexia Show and Dysgraphia Show, and this year he expanded it to the Neurodiversity Show, because so many of us, myself included, I just got an ADHD diagnosis last week, have got dyslexia and have been dealing with the dyslexic traits, but then realizing, actually, am I attributing this to dyslexia when actually it could be a attentional issue rather than a processing issue, etc. And so finding where those co-occurrences aren't just a label, they're a strategy.
Yeah, definitely.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Liz. This podcast is sponsored by DyslexiaProductivityCoaching.com. It's my day job when I'm not hosting this podcast. Tell me, do you know what you want to achieve in the workplace, but you're struggling with how to achieve it? Maybe you suspect some traits of dyslexia are getting in the way. Well, that's where Dyslexia Productivity Coaching comes in, because we give you a simple productivity system for your Apple devices that harnesses the creativity that comes with your dyslexia. It includes proven methods like note-taking, reminders, speech-to-text, mind mapping, and more, all tailored to your needs. It'll free up your time and help you achieve outstanding results. Book a complimentary call to discuss it with me, and if you do it soon, I may also be available to coach you personally via Zoom. So don't be shy, go to dyslexiaproductivitycoaching.com or swipe up and book it now.